My father lifted his glass and toasted my brother like I wasn't there. To Grant, our new regional director. Grant smiled across the table. I'm the new regional director and you're still nothing. My father laughed. My mother stared at her plate. I kept my fingers around the cold stem of my wine glass and smiled back. What none of them knew was that 24 hours earlier, the investment firm I ran had completed the controlling acquisition of Grant's company. Grant thought he was celebrating the biggest promotion of his life. I already knew there was one problem. By Monday morning, he was going to learn what his title was worth. Grant had always been easier for my father to understand. He liked schedules, rankings, measurable things, baseball statistics, report cards, job titles printed neatly beneath a name. I was the one who kept changing directions. At 12, I sold handmade bookmarks to classmates. At 14, I started tracking neighborhood babysitting jobs in a notebook because I wanted to know which families paid on time. At 16, I spent a summer reading business books from the library instead of joining the swim team. My father called me restless. He called Grant focused. One spring, Grant made the varsity baseball roster the same week I won a statewide academic award. His team photo was framed before dinner. My certificate stayed on the kitchen counter beneath grocery coupons, utility bills, and a pizza menu until someone finally moved it into a drawer. Nobody threw it away. That almost made it worse. They simply forgot it was there. When Grant turned 16, Dad helped him buy a used car. When I asked for help with one 2 years later, Dad slid the classified ads across the table and told me earning it myself would teach me responsibility. So I did. I worked weekends at a bakery until my hands smelled like sugar and dish soap, no matter how many times I washed them. Grant drove to school. I took the bus. By college, the pattern had become so ordinary that no one bothered disguising it. Grant chose a business program close to home. Mom and Dad covered most of his tuition and living expenses. I wanted a more specialized program in another city. Dad sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and shook his head. Too expensive, too uncertain. I borrowed part of the money, worked during school, and took internships whenever I could. Grant came home for holidays with stories about corporate recruiting events. I came home tired. That difference seemed to settle everything. After graduation, I moved into restructuring consulting. The hours were ugly. The work was harder to explain. I rented a small apartment because I traveled constantly. I missed birthdays. I skipped Thanksgiving once because a client was collapsing faster than expected. A few years later, I helped build an investment firm with 2 partners. I never told my family the scale of it. At first, there was nothing impressive to tell. We had debt-cheap office furniture and more work than sleep. Then things changed, slowly. The firm grew. My responsibilities grew with it. But at home, nothing changed at all. Grant bought a condo. He earned bonuses. He had a title Dad could repeat at dinner parties without explaining it twice. I had a rented apartment and a job everyone called consulting. Dad could understand Grant in one sentence. He never really tried to understand me. There were photographs of Grant as an adult all over my parents' house. Promotions, vacations, awards. Most of mine stopped somewhere around high school. That was when I understood it. Grant had been allowed to become a man in this family. I was still the girl everyone expected to figure herself out. Back at the table, Grant was still talking. He had moved on from the title to the office. More responsibility, a larger team, better compensation once the paperwork cleared. Dad listened with both hands around his wine glass, smiling like every sentence confirmed something he had believed for years. I cut a piece of roast beef and barely tasted it. Something was wrong. I had reviewed the leadership transition the night before. No regional director appointment had been approved. So when does it become official, I asked. Grant looked at me. It is official. HR sent the confirmation. His smile tightened. Marcus handled it. That name changed the temperature in the room. Marcus Hale was an executive vice president overseeing supply chain. During the acquisition review, several supplier relationships connected to his division had been sent to compliance for further examination. Nothing had been proven. But he should not have been promising anyone a new executive role on his own. Dad leaned back. Why are you interrogating him? I'm asking a question. Grant laughed once. There's always something with you. Then Dad mentioned the investment, almost casually. He said Grant had been offered a chance to put money into a private supplier deal Marcus had introduced. A rare opportunity, early access, the kind of thing people supposedly heard about only after they had moved into the right circles. How much, I asked? Dad looked proud. About 150,000. My fork stopped. Grant took a drink. Dad explained that most of it would come from a home equity line. The transfer was scheduled for Monday. The room suddenly felt smaller. Has an independent attorney reviewed it? Grant rolled his eyes. Marcus is in it himself. That wasn't my question. Dad's expression hardened. I asked who owned the business, whether anyone outside Marcus's circle had reviewed the terms, whether the investment had any official connection to Grant's employer. No one answered clearly. "Don't send the money Monday," I said. Grant pushed his plate away. "There it is." Dad stared at me. "What?" "The jealousy." I looked at him. He continued. "Your brother finally gets ahead and suddenly you're the expert." Mom touched the edge of her napkin. Then without looking at me, she said, "Can we just let your brother have one night?" That hurt more than Dad's voice. I watched her smooth the same wrinkle in the cloth twice. No one at that table wanted to know whether I was right. They wanted me quiet. Dad reached for the bottle and poured himself more wine. A dark red drop slipped over the rim and spread slowly across the white tablecloth. No one moved to wipe it away. I set my napkin beside my plate. "Excuse me." No one tried to stop me. The hallway outside the dining room was cooler. The laughter behind me softened as I stepped into the kitchen, where the dishwasher hummed beneath the counter and a clock clicked above the refrigerator. I took out my phone. Claire answered on the second ring. She was our CFO and had spent the last 6 weeks buried in the financial records of the company we had acquired. She trusted numbers more than assumptions, which was why I trusted her. "I need 4 things verified," I said. I gave her Grant's name. There was a pause. Keys clicked. "Still senior procurement manager," Claire said. "No promotion approved. Regional director, nothing. Marcus Hale." Another pause. "His authority over senior appointments is restricted during the transition, and compliance is still reviewing several supplier relationships." I looked through the doorway. Grant's voice carried down the hall. He was telling Dad about the team he expected to manage. "The private supplier investment," I said. "Is it connected to the company more typing?" "No approved employee investment program matches that description." "Anything else?" "Not without compliance reviewing it." That was enough. I ended the call and opened a new message to Rachel, our senior internal counsel. Rachel handled governance during acquisitions and had a habit of turning complicated situations into clean lists. I typed carefully. "Grant Bennett is my brother. Possible conflict involving a supplier investment introduced by Marcus Hale. Please make sure any review involving Grant is handled independently. I will recuse myself from employment decisions concerning him." I read it once. Then I sent it. No accusation. No request to punish anyone. No favor. Just a record. I checked the acquisition summary again. Friday's closing was complete. Our firm now held controlling ownership. The Monday transition announcement was already scheduled. I locked my phone. For years, my family had treated every disagreement like a contest I could win only by explaining myself better. I had explained enough. I wasn't going to touch Dad's bank account. I couldn't stop his transfer for him. The money was his, and so was the decision. I would warn him once more. After that, the facts would have to do what my words never could. When I returned to the dining room, Grant was describing where he planned to put his new desk. Dad was listening like a proud investor. Mom refilled the water glasses. No one asked where I had been. I sat down, placed my phone face down beside my plate, and waited. This time I wasn't going to argue with what they believed. I was going to let reality arrive on schedule. I waited until Dad reached for the bottle again. "Don't send the 150,000 on Monday." His hand stopped. Grant exhaled through his nose. "We already did this." "No, you dismissed it." Dad set the bottle down. "And why exactly should I take financial advice from someone who refuses to tell her own family what she does for a living?" I looked at him. "Because this investment needs an independent review." Grant laughed. "You don't understand how these deals work." I turned to him. "Did HR send you written confirmation of your promotion?" His jaw tightened. Marcus confirmed it. That wasn't my question. Dad leaned forward. "Enough, Olivia." I kept looking at Grant. "Has your compensation change been signed?" Silence. "Do you have an effective date?" Grant shifted in his chair. Marcus said everything would be finalized after the transition. "And did Marcus ever tell you that this supplier investment was an official company program?" Grant's face changed slightly. "Not much. Just enough." "No." Dad pushed back from the table. "This is ridiculous." Then he looked at me with the same expression he had used when I was 20 and asking for help with tuition. When you've actually built something of your own, Olivia, maybe I'll listen to you lecture your brother about business. Mom stared at her plate. She said nothing. That was it. I turned back to Grant. You said you're the new regional director. I am. I let the silence sit between us. Actually, you're not. Grant stopped smiling. Dad frowned. What did you say? Grant is still senior procurement manager. Grant shook his head immediately. That's wrong. No promotion has been approved. No compensation change. No effective date. And Marcus does not have the authority to finalize that appointment during the ownership transition. The room went still. Grant stared at me. How would you know that I folded my hands on the table? The same way I know that the $150,000 isn't going into any company-sponsored investment. Dad's face lost some color. I continued. The opportunity Marcus introduced is private. It has not been approved as an employee program. And several supplier relationships connected to his division are under internal compliance review. Grant stood halfway. You're saying Marcus is doing something illegal? No. My voice stayed flat. I'm saying there is a review. I'm saying no conclusion has been reached. And I'm saying you should never risk this house on a deal. Nobody outside Marcus's circle has independently examined. Dad looked from Grant to me. Where are you getting this from the people responsible for reviewing it? His eyes narrowed. What people? I reached into my bag and placed a thin acquisition summary on the table. Dad looked at it, but didn't touch it. Friday, I said the investment firm I run completed an acquisition. Grant's eyes dropped to the page. I continued. We now hold controlling ownership of the company you work for. Nobody moved. The refrigerator clicked on in the kitchen. Grant picked up the summary. He read the first page twice. Then he looked at me. You, yes. Dad's voice came out quieter. You run the firm. I founded it with 2 partners. I've been running it for years. Mom finally looked at me. Why didn't you tell us at first? Confidentiality. I looked at Dad. Later I wanted to know whether you could respect me when you thought there was nothing impressive to respect. No one answered. I didn't need them to. I pointed to the investment papers beside Grant. Dad, call the bank before Monday. Ask them to place the transfer on hold, pending independent review. Have your attorney look at everything. Can you stop it? No. That answer surprised him. It's your money, your account, your responsibility. Grant sank back into his chair. What happens to me? Nothing tonight. He looked up. Meaning, I disclose that you're my brother. I've removed myself from any employment decision involving you. HR, legal, and compliance will handle the review. Dad frowned. You can protect him. I could interfere. I stood. That isn't the same thing. By Monday morning, Dad had placed the transfer on hold before the money left his account. The ownership transition was announced that afternoon. The review took several days. Grant was not accused of fraud, but he had failed to disclose a potential conflict, shared purchasing information outside the proper process, and shown judgment the company could not accept in a procurement leadership role. He was demoted. His bonus disappeared. He was transferred out of procurement. Dad called me that evening. Can you fix this? I looked through my office window at the gray Chicago skyline. No, he's your brother. That's exactly why I won't. If I erased a fair consequence because Grant shared my last name, I would become the same kind of person who had spent years teaching him that rules bent in his direction. When I hung up, I thought about the dinner table. Grant's wine glass was probably still there, full, untouched. There was no promotion left to toast. 3 weeks later, I drove back to my parents' house. The trees along the street had lost most of their leaves. Damp branches scratched against the gray sky, and the porch light was already on, even though it was barely 5. Dad opened the door. He looked older. Not ruined, not broken, just quieter. There was no wine on the table that night. Mom had made coffee. Dad carried 2 mugs into the kitchen and placed one in front of me. For once, he didn't ask whether I was still renting. He didn't ask what my next deal was worth. He sat across from me and rubbed his thumb along the handle of his mug. I spent most of my career evaluating risk, he said. I waited. I thought numbers made me objective. The refrigerator hummed behind him. He looked down. Turns out the biggest bias I had was sitting at my own dinner table. I didn't rescue him from the silence. He continued. I thought success had a certain shape. It had Grant's shape, I said. Dad looked at me, then nodded. Yes. No excuse followed. That mattered. Later, Mom found me near the sink, drying a plate that was already dry. She stood beside me for several seconds before speaking. I should have said something. I set the plate down. Which time her face tightened. All of them. I looked through the window above the sink. The backyard was dark, except for the yellow porch light reflected in the glass. What Dad said hurt, I told her. But you heard it every time. She lowered her eyes. I know. You made me think nobody in the room believed it was wrong. Her fingers closed around the dish towel. I'm sorry. I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't. But I stayed. That was enough for that night. Grant was still working. Different department. Smaller title. No bonus. He had started management training and was meeting with a mentor outside the company. I had not called anyone on his behalf. For the first time, his next step belonged entirely to him. Mine did too. A week later, Dad had an old friend over for dinner. I arrived late from the office. His friend asked what I did. I felt my shoulders tighten before Dad even opened his mouth. Old reflex. Dad looked at me, then back at his friend. Olivia runs her own business, he said. He paused. She built it herself. That was all. No acquisition numbers, no title, no comparison to Grant. I looked at the wine glass in front of me. Late afternoon light rested along its rim. For years I had imagined hearing those words would feel like winning. It didn't. It felt quieter than that. I set the untouched glass down, and for the first time I didn't need anyone at that table to raise it for me. I left my parents' house after sunset. Chicago waited beyond the dark highway, its lights blurred against the windshield. For years I had driven away from that house wondering what I needed to become before they would finally see me. That night I understood something simpler. Being seen had never created my value. Their approval didn't give me my worth. Losing my need for it gave me my freedom. Some families change when the truth arrives. Others only reveal what was always there. Either way, a boundary is where self-respect begins. And sometimes walking away quietly is the loudest answer.